Hello, and welcome to episode 12 of Charlotte Mecklenburg History with Dan Morrill. Today is Sunday, May 24th, 2020. I'm Dan's daughter, Mary Dana, and I'm here with him today through Zoom. And we have a big topic today that is going to take a while, so I'm going to try to get through this first part quickly. That he is talking about North Charlotte and NoDa. Hey, Dad.
You know, I think it's rather appropriate that you wanted to shorten the history part, because the reality is that I think most of the people who like NoDa don't know the history and, quite frankly, don't care.
Well, they might care. I don't know.
I think the evidence is in the pudding. But
Okay.
Anyway, it's just a personal opinion. I'll do my typical disclaimer. This does not represent anybody but me. Not the Historic Landmarks Commission, not UNCC, not Preserve Mecklenburg. It's just me. But I do want to spend just a minute. Let me just go ahead and start, Mary Lane. Let's not worry about what date it is and the word. Anyway.
Okay.
All right. Now, this is an aerial map of what we now know as NoDa. Now, you'll notice right here, you see the cursor?
Yes.
Well, that's the railroad track. Now, that railroad was built in the 1850s by the state of North Carolina, and it's leased by Southern Railroad. And without the railroad, there would be nothing up there. The railroad was everything. And this all starts, as far as the history is concerned, in 1903. And we're looking at 3 textile mills up there. Now, this is originally known as the Mecklenburg Mill, later became known as the Mercury Mill. And we'll see that it opened in 1905. Here is the Johnston Manufacturing Company, that was named for its founder, Charles Worth Johnston, who was an official of the Highland Mill Company. And that opened in 1916, essentially to take advantage of all the need for uniforms that resulted from World War I. This is the Diggy. This is Highland Park Mill number 3, which opened in 1903. Now, there are 2 major mill villages here, and they're split by 36th Street. This is 36th Street right here. This is North Davidson Street. Now, this is the smaller of the textile mills, and it served the Mecklenburg, or the Mercury Mill. One of the streets we'll see in there is named Mercury Street. This is a much larger mill village here. And they are very different, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But it served the Johnston Manufacturing Company, and it also served Highland Mill number 3. Now, here's a map. This is a Sanborn Insurance map. A lot of people know these maps. It's basically a graphic illustration. I couldn't get the Highland Park number 3 mill because it's on a different page. In the Sanborn, a different map, but it's right down here.
Okay.
36th Street, North Davidson Street. Here's the Mecklenburg Mercury Mill. Here's the Johnston Manufacturing Company, and of course, Highland Park Mill on the other side. Now you see a typical pattern of a mill village right over here.
What year is that map from?
It's actually 1950, but
Okay.
the mills were still operating then, but it was, believe me, past its heyday. But you can see all little mill houses.
Yeah.
And I really want you to focus on this streetscape, because you're going to see that we saved, by we, and I'll talk about that in a minute, we saved this house and we saved this house. All the rest of the houses on this side of the street are destroyed, and there's a big apartment complex there. Now, I'm going to first talk about this mill village here very briefly. Well, here are the mills. Here they are. Mecklenburg Mill, 1905. Johnston Mill, 1916. Highland Park Manufacturing Company Mill. This has been turned into housing. This is a major multi-use district now. It's got
the Highland Park one is multi-use. Okay.
Condos and huge here. The Johnston Mill is scheduled for renovation, but nothing's happened to it yet. And here is a historic photograph of the Highland Mill. Now, the Mercury Mill, the Little Mill Village, the one that's on the north side, it reflects a style of house that was put in a book called Cotton Mills Commercial Features. Here it is, brown book, by Daniel Augustus Tompkins. I could do a whole program on Tompkins. Probably the most important figure in all of Charlotte's post-Civil War history.
D.A. Tompkins.
Yeah, and he graduated from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in Troy, New York, and there's a street in Dilworth named for the school he graduated from because Edward Dilworth Latta, who developed Dilworth, so admired Daniel Augustus Tompkins. Now, and I want, I did one thing. I don't know whether I can go back. Well, anyway.
You don't need to go back. What were you going to talk about?
No, I didn't go back. This is right.
Okay.
Now, these mill houses are what are front gable facing mill houses, and they come straight out of that book that if I can find it, that Cotton Mills commercial.
Yeah.
Those are D.A. Tompkins. Now, the other mill village was done by Stuart Kramer. I could do a whole program on him, but if you'll notice, his mill houses were totally different. They didn't have that front projecting gable, and they had a porch all across the side. So they're very different in their their style. Now, we could do a whole thing on textile mills. I mean, this is Highland Park Mill number 3, designed by Kramer, historic photograph I've already shown you. And here are workers. Now, you notice a couple of things here. Bare feet.
Yes.
You notice a lot of children. You notice a lot of women. And you notice that everybody's white. And the reality is that most of these people who came to work in these mills had been tenant farmers. They'd either been tenant farmers or they had been very, very impoverished farmers. And they were attracted to the mill for the simple reason they could make more money. Now, it was a tough, tough life. You know, a lot of people think women didn't work outside the home. Well, believe me, thousands and thousands and thousands of working class women and their children worked in the mills. And you can see they had to experience all kinds of challenges, including the influenza epidemic of 1918, influenza situation at Highland Park. Well, number 3, much improved.
Yeah, I see the sign that you have.
And all of that. So it was a very, very tough life. Now, one of the things interesting that was really a big factor was trying to keep up worker morale. And one of the big things was baseball. You would be every Saturday afternoon all over Charlotte. In the 1890s, 1910s, 1920s, 1930s, there was a baseball game every Saturday afternoon. And that was a big deal. That was really, these were paid for by the mill. The mill bought the uniforms, the mill hired the coach, and you'd be surprised how many Major League Baseball players came out of this mill culture. And
Wow. Okay.
I don't have time. Now, despite the fact that they wanted to have good relations, there were labor problems. You remember that big streetcar strike that we talked about that occurred in 1919 with Frank McNinch?
Yes.
A lot of the mill workers went out on a sympathy strike. Oh. And one of the places they would meet was the local drugstore, which was in the Hand Pharmacy. And the upper floor of the drugstore was kind of like a meeting room. And there were, believe me, a lot of labor meetings there. Now this...
Is the Hand Pharmacy still in existence? Okay.
Now, there's no question that whole history, most of the people that go up there and look at art, and I think it's great to go look at art, people that go to art, they have no idea. Now, in 1969, the last of the mills in North Charlotte closed. And this was an advertisement saying if you want a job, you can get one in Mount Holly.
Okay.
Highland Park Mill number 3, the biggest textile mill ever built in Charlotte and in Mecklenburg County, closed in 1969. Well, that was a total devastation to the neighborhood.
Sure.
Now, I'll spend a little bit of time talking about this because, first of all, between 1969 and 1986, North Charlotte was a dead neighborhood, and it was a fragile neighborhood. But the mill sold the houses. A lot of the former mill workers bought them. A lot of investors bought them and used them for rental housing. There were real efforts to try to get people organized. And one man who was a big figure was Reverend Paul Horn. I came to Charlotte in 1963, and I remember I'd see Paul Horn all the time. He was the minister at Johnston Memorial Presbyterian Church in North Charlotte. You can see what the condition of the houses was at the picture above Reverend Horn.
Really run down.
They were run down. There was garbage all. And this is a great picture on the right because it shows residents of North Charlotte that were going to picket the city to get greater city services. And you can see the kind of people that were living in North Charlotte. Dana, these ain't the kind of people that frequent art galleries, I'll tell you that. Now,
okay,
you see a meeting down here that fellas handing out something for a neighborhood meeting so things could go all together.
Okay.
And look what the status of the stores were. Now this is the 3200 block of North Davidson Street, where there used to be all kinds of stores to serve those mill workers.
Okay.
When the mills closed down, and you had this devastation to the neighborhood, all the buildings went totally, completely silent. I mean, it was just absolutely horrific. Now, I said until 1986. Now, the earliest mention I have found of NoDa was not even a name.
Yeah.
It was always referred to as North Charlotte.
Mm-hmm.
Between 1986 and 1994, you began to see a transformation of this neighborhood. And that's really when NoDa comes into existence. The earliest mention I have found in the newspaper for anything that says NoDa, it is 1997. So that's what, between 1986 and 1994. Now, I would give credit to 3 people.
Well, I want to mention this too, that NoDa stands for North Davidson, right?
Well,
So first,
there's some debate about that, but
oh, really?
Most people believe it is.
Okay.
I believe you're right, but there's some that insist that's not true. I don't know what. Anyway,
Okay.
I think that's certainly the majority opinion.
Right.
How are we doing on time? Where am I?
Oh, well, you're doing okay. You've been talking, hold on, about 13 minutes.
Okay. Warren Burgess was truly one of my best friends. I posted some pictures of Warren. Warren died in 2005. He was racked by pain his entire life. He was an urban planner for the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Planning Commission. He worked for a while for the city of Davidson, but this was in the 1980s. And he was a visionary. He was a visionary. And he thought that one of the things that would really make North Charlotte work would be to make people realize what its historic significance was. Now, this is not a very good picture. I just couldn't, but this says a National Register Historic District, founded 1903. Now, they're obviously using the date of the establishment of the Highland Park Mill number 3. In 1990, North Charlotte, not NoDa,
Okay, it wasn't called that
North
then.
Charlotte was listed in the National Register as an historic district. Now, clearly what that meant was that this neighborhood was just as important to the history of Charlotte as Myers Park. And that was the hope was that would really sort of make people say, look, this isn't just an old rundown neighborhood. It's a very, very special place. And Warren Burgess was responsible for getting it listed in the National Register as a historic district. And quite frankly, that really spurred my interest in it, because I said, hey, wait a minute, this is something we need to get involved in. And I'll talk about that in a minute. Now, Warren Burgess was one of the people that was involved, but these were also tremendously important pioneers. Their husband and wife, Ruth Ava Lyons, Paul Sayers. This photograph was taken in 1999. Paul Sayers was a sculptor. Ruth Lyons was an artist. And quite frankly, they were looking for a place where they could buy dirt cheap structures and turn them into an art gallery. The first two they bought the collective price for both was $40,000. They later bought a third building, and in 1999, when this picture was taken, it was called the Center of the Earth Gallery, and it was really a spark. And they were visionaries. Now, by the way.
Now, wait a minute. You said this picture was taken in 1999, but your caption says 1986.
Well, that's because the first buildings they bought were 1986.
Okay.
They bought 2 buildings in 1986. They came back and bought a third building in 1999 where they opened the Center of the Earth Gallery. So
I gotcha. And then this picture was taken then. Okay.
By the way, I posted this on Facebook, and Ruth Lyons was so appreciative because that little girl, that baby, is 30 years old. And she said it was so wonderful to see her. But, you know, this really was, now look, here is 1985, the 3200 block of North Davidson Street. Here's 1992, because once Ruth Lyons and Paul Sayers and Warren Burgess brought attention to the neighborhood, more people came to establish art galleries. And they started having, and look at the difference in the nature of the street. I mean, it was a total rebirth. And of course, there were these gallery crawls where all these people would come on Friday nights, and you'd go up there and man, boom, 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 boom,
Yeah.
boom, they're playing the drums. And
I went to one, I remember, in the early 90s.
It was a totally new world. Now, of course, from my contingent, and I think the evidence will show you in a moment, I wish these people had some sense of the history of the neighborhood. Now, you know, those poor mill workers and Reverend Carl Horn, they don't know, Paul Horn, didn't know who these people were. And there were a bunch of galleries. This was 23 Studio. This was one of the many galleries that people would go into. And anyway, I could go on and on about what it meant, how it changed things, how it adapted to things. But, you know, you think about art. Art is, you know, art is primordial.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you go back to caves of antiquity. And you'll see that the art impulse is there. People are drawing.
Mm-hmm.
And we are primarily visual creatures. And there's no question about the fact that this was a good thing. And it was here's the thing about Charlotte. I had a conversation recently, but Charlotte in many ways really does need to have a spark. It needs to have a place where people can feel a sense of community and connected one another.
Mm-hmm.
And the scale of these buildings being very small, the scale of these buildings really does create a different feel than glass-skinned skyscrapers sitting on Trine Street with the wind blowing 40 miles an hour. So it worked. Now
It was more intimate, right? Kind of intimate.
Exactly. Now I want to talk about this. How are we doing time-wise?
Hold on. About 20 minutes you've been
Okay,
talking.
we got time.
You're doing good.
Now I would say, in all honesty, and I'm not trying to toot a horn, Warren Burgess, Paul Sayers, and Ruth Ava Lyons, and Dan Morrow.
Yeah, you guys got the neighborhood going.
Well, we decided, we established a private nonprofit affiliate of the Historic Landmarks Commission in the early 1990s. Now, this is a D.A. Tompkins style mill house. This is on Mercury Street. I told you to remember that streetscape when we were looking at that map earlier. Now, this is very clearly a D.A. Tompkins inspired house. It's a three-gable house, basically. It's got a cross gable and a front gable. I got a call from a man with the city named Richard Bargoyle. Because this was in the National Register of Historic Places, federal money was going to be used to tear this house down.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't have any before pictures, but I'm telling you, this made Sanford and Son look like Angel Island. I mean, it was terrible.
I remember you took me to see it. You drove me to see it before.
Awful.
It was awful.
Awful. Well, because it was in the National Register, and this is one way the National Register helps, it basically restrains the federal government. Richard Bargoyle said that he wanted to find a way to save the house, and would we buy it? We bought it for $5,000 because that's what it was going to cost to tear it down.
Mm-hmm.
We invested about $20,000 in it to get it decent.
Yes.
And as I best remember, we sold it for about $30,000.
I think that's about right.
But what we did was we put a preservation covenant on it, meaning it could never be torn down. Okay. Now let me show you another one. In many ways, is any more interesting. Again, this is a D.A. Tompkins inspired Mercury Mecklenburg mill house.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's at the corner of Mercury Street and Alexander Street. Now, notice what's totally around it.
Condos, apartments.
Well, apartments. I don't know whether they're condos or apartments. Right. I don't know what they are, but they're certainly residential units. Now, the fact that private money was used to build these apartments, the National Register couldn't save anything. But when we got this house, our private nonprofit, when we sold it, and as I remember, we paid about $20,000 for it and sold it for about $35,000. But when we sold it, we put preservation easements on it. And I got a call from somebody who bought that house years ago saying, I want to move my house. I'm surrounded by apartments. And my response was, man, I'm sorry, but you can't. Well, it's
Mm-hmm.
good. Now get this, man, Diana. Remember, we sold this house for about $30,000 in 1994.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it just sold for $299,000.
Right.
But it's going to be there. It's going to be an icon. And I can, well, let me show you. Now, the third one that we did.
Is somebody going to live there? Is it zoned residential, or can they turn it into a business? Or
Oh, yes, it's residential. It's going to
okay.
be excuse me. Now, here's a hand pharmacy. Remember I talked about that?
Yes. Yes. Where they would meet above it.
I went to see Frank Hand, who was the surviving son of the owner. And I suggested to Frank that he give the property to our private nonprofit. And he did.
Oh.
We didn't pay anything for it. And when we sold it, which we did, we didn't pay anything for it, put about $40,000 into it and sold it for $90,000.
Mm-hmm.
And this was the same year as the mill house. It's 1994. Now, it will never be torn down. And now, by the way, it's a very Cabo fish taco.
I see that is a very popular restaurant.
People go in there to eat their tacos. They don't know anything about pharmacy. You know, Jim, the Christmas drives you nuts. But anyway, and I'll give you the evidence in a minute. Now, Mary Dana, I suggested to you that the people who have been attracted to what is now known as NoDa. Now, this is on Yadkin Avenue, which is in Stuart Kramer's designed mill village.
Okay.
They had a perfect legal right to do it because it's not a local historic district. And very few of the buildings in the neighborhood would qualify to be historic landmarks. They tore a mill house down and built that thing.
Okay.
Got any response to that?
What is it? Is it a house?
Yes.
Well, it's certainly an unusual design.
Don't talk about that. Talk about the fact that they tore down a mill house and put that house up. What does that say about sensitivity to the historic character of the neighborhood?
Oh, that's not really seen as an important factor.
In fact, I think what they ought to do with the National Register District in North Charlotte is clearly to alter its borders.
Mm-hmm.
Because the people that are going up there to live, first of all, they know nothing about the history. They don't care anything about the history. And they have a perfect legal right to do this. And they didn't even know what they were doing. I guarantee you, they just thought there was an ugly old house that ought to be torn down.
Yeah.
And it was lived in by a linthead mill worker.
Oh, jeez.
I mean, I'm telling you. Now, what do you think about that? Now, that's a mill house. That was a Stuart Kramer mill house. You remember how it had a porch all the way across the front?
Yes. Yes.
Look what they put up here.
They added sort of a gable or no, what's that called?
What's your reaction to that?
Well, I mean, at least the house was preserved, right? They didn't tear the house totally down.
Is it showing sensitivity to the historic streetscape?
Well, more than tearing it down. I'd say it fits in a little better. But,
you're more forgiving than I am.
Well, what do you think about it?
I think it's a travesty.
Okay.
I think it's cultural insensitivity. How can people go and look at art and then go and put up something like this?
Well, it made it turn into sort of.
If you operate on the assumption that respect for the historic character of the neighborhood should be retained. And it is a National Register Historic District.
It looks like a Cape Cod style
Yeah,
house now.
exactly.
Yeah, they changed the
I'm
style.
sure it's a lot of fun to go up there and sit on that porchy orgy.
Okay.
Probably look over and see Highland Park Mill number 3 and see people sitting outside drinking beer.
Mm-hmm.
But what do you think about it?
Well,
You've told me.
yes, I told you. Oh, here we go. Uh-oh.
Now, you see there's a mill house to the left. Do you see it?
I see it.
Well, Mary Dinah, what you think about that?
It does not look like it fits in. It's very contemporary looking. Lots of glass, lots of very, very linear.
Does it say anything about the history of the neighborhood?
It does not fit in with the rest of the houses that are in the neighborhood.
Does it say anything about public awareness of the history of the neighborhood?
That it's not an issue.
Right. That's right. Now, these people are not ignorant. They're not ignorant.
No.
They have a perfect right to do it because the city has never made this a local historic district.
Mm-hmm.
Now, think about the difference between what we saw on Alexander Street, where we put preservation covenants on it. If there was a private nonprofit group that was active up there, it could really do something. Mm-hmm. Now, there are a few things that are left. Now, see, people don't ever think, now, this is on 36th Street.
Mm-hmm.
This is the Heron Brothers Ice Plant. Now, Mary Dana, you don't remember the days before electric refrigerators.
That's correct.
They used
I'm
to
not
call
that
them
old.
ice boxes.
Mm-hmm.
Why did they call them ice boxes?
Because they would just put big blocks of ice in them.
And where did they go to get the ice?
I guess ice companies,
and
like this place.
Heron Brothers, I said the Heron Brothers Ice Plant was an integral part of the North Charlotte Mill Village. Industrialist Horace Johnson, owner of the Johnston Textile Mill, persuaded the Heron family to establish the plant to provide block ice to the textile mills and the mill houses in the neighborhood. 4 generations of the Heron family operated the business. The building is now under contract to Grubb Properties and is therefore threatened. And it's going to be torn down.
I was going to ask, is it going to be torn down?
What's your reaction to that?
So it's going to be torn down and apartments are going to be put there? Is that the idea?
What's going to go up there? I'm sure it'll be whatever can make the most money for whoever buys it.
Well, that's the issue when real estate starts to become valuable.
Well, that's exactly right. Now, what if they had done the same thing in Charleston?
Well, there would be more outrage. You mean if you went down on the Battery and it was just a bunch of high-rise apartments?
You think about what preservation can mean, and think about now the area of the neighborhood that still has some integrity is there on North Davidson Street, and of course the mills are still there, no doubt about that. But what do you think?
Well, I'm sorry to see it go.
The evidence is there. Now, let me. How are we on time? About done.
Yeah, you're getting close to the end. You've been talking about 33 minutes. Well, was that your last picture?
Just let me show you one.
Oh yeah, you can go.
Return thing here, and see, there's that map.
Yep.
Of the Mill Village.
The Sanborn map, right?
And you remember, this is Mercury Street. There's the one house that we saved with the preservation covenant. There's the other house that we saved with the preservation covenant. What have you got all in here?
Apartments.
I will tell you that if there are not policies put in place to protect what's left, all of that stuff up there is doomed.
Mm-hmm.
The word is D-O-O-M-E-D. And one of the things that's going to accelerate that doom is the arrival of light rail.
Yeah, I was going to say there's a light rail stop in NoDa now, because I actually went to NoDa within the past year for the first time in a long time, because I haven't gone because parking is such a problem. But now with the light rail, it's a lot easier to access.
Well, you know, one reason I feel so strongly about this is I gave so much energy to it.
Well, I know, I was going to say, you got it going. I'll tell people, I'll say, well, you know, my dad was one of the people who got the neighborhood revitalized. And because I remember going up there with you in the early 90s, and you showed me that house that you guys were going to redo. And I said, are you kidding? I said, who's going to live up here? I can't imagine anybody wanting to live in that house. But I was obviously proved wrong, because it's amazing to me to see the transformation of the neighborhood. But I guess what I would say is that's the double-edged sword of neighborhood revitalization. You know, you make it such a hot area that the real estate becomes so valuable that these small properties.
That's right. And the people, interesting, the artists that were originally drawn there because space was cheap, they're
Mm-hmm.
driven out.
That's right. They got driven
And
out.
it becomes what controls Charlotte: corporate power.
Right. So it's sort of losing its character. Its character is transforming again.
It's getting nibbled away.
Right. Right. That
We'll
what
have
made
to
it
put,
special is gone.
we'll have to put up historic markers in the sidewalk. Here stood the 3200 block of North Tryon Street. Go over on Mercury Street. This used to be a mill village street. It's now dominated by apartments.
So yeah, I got, like I said, that's sort of the double-edged sword that you have. It's really important to have these protective covenants in place, like you said, or these things will go.
They'll go.
So I think it's good that you have saved what you did. But it's sad to see a lot of the buildings are still under threat.
Right.
But anyway, well, Dad, so thank you for sharing all this. And yeah, I've been really proud of all the work that you've done. And I wanted people to know your part in what happened. And I know this one was a lot of work. There was a lot of pictures that you had to get together to show the story. And there's a lot more that we could tell, like you said. So anyway.
All that's very true, Mary Diana.
So now we're taking a break next week, but then the week after that, we're going to talk about the Eastover neighborhood.
Fascinating neighborhood. The first neighborhood that was totally automobile dependent. They didn't worry about streetcars.
Oh, okay, that's interesting. All right, well, Dad, well, thanks for being here today, and thanks everybody for joining us. And we will see you next time. Bye.
Bye, everybody.